The M715 model is a general-purpose cargo type. Its cab is equipped with a folding one-piece windshield, a folding top, and side windows with regulators. The cargo body has folding longitudinal seats along both sides and roof bows supporting a folding canvas top.
Today we're going to start off and talk a little bit about a project that's actually been in the shop for a while, but hopefully is going to get some attention this winter, and our goal of actually moving it into something that is not only a roller, but with a little luck, moving under its own power. The backstory on this one goes back a long time in a lot of ways. I've always had kind of a affinity for the old military, commercial, off-the-shelf type trucks, the CUCVs, the old Dodge Power Wagons. My father, when I was very young, had this four-door short bed international pickup that had been built for the U.S. Forest Service, and it was very green and just had that kind of military sort of look without really being a military vehicle. So I've always kind of had this just odd affinity for that type of equipment. To me, it's just cool. So this project goes back to 2016, and I was at my first All for Fun in Empire, Colorado, at the Show and Shine, which is an event that they do as part of the All for Fun every year. People get their vehicles together and just, everybody looks and everybody else's stuff. And there was this fleet-side Jeep pickup there, and it was just super clean, super pretty truck. And I was there, I was looking at it. Guy came up to me and was talking to me about it. And he was admiring it as well, and said he had one that he was in the process of putting a Cummins diesel engine into. Just something else I have a real affinity for, going back into my history. And I made a comment to him that that sounded like a really cool thing, but in my world, or in my mind, what would be perfect would be to get a hold of one of the old military Jeep pickups and put that Cummins 12-valve motor into it. And it turns out the owner of this fleet-side pickup was standing behind me at this time. And this is somebody that goes by the name of Boston Bob, or Boston Bob Donovan. And Bob has an interesting network of connections as well as a business dealing with these old Jeep trucks. And he basically taps me on the shoulder at that point and says, "I know just the truck." By the time the All for Fun event was over, I had agreed to buy this 1967, 1968 M715 Jeep pickup that Bob knew about, that was located in Arizona, New Mexico, and was supposed to be clean, rust-free, but didn't have a powertrain, which would be exactly perfect for somebody who wants to take that truck and put a whole different powertrain into it. Now, my first full-size pickup that I bought personally was a 1992 Dodge 2500 with the Cummins diesel motor. That's the first vehicle that I put personally over 100,000 miles on. And I loved that motor. So in my mind, the absolute perfect truck was going to be that M715 with the Cummins powertrain. So that was where this project kicked off in 2016, acquiring the 715, and then acquiring a donor vehicle to give me a powertrain that I could put into it. So, not talking about this red truck. This is actually, I think, the third red truck I've owned. The 92 Ram was my first full-size truck. It was my first diesel engine. It was my first Cummins. And it definitely set off a history for me, because I'm really into diesel engines. And I actually have found that, you know, I like the fuel economy, I like the power, I like the way diesel engines behave. So I had bought this 92 Ram, I put well over 100,000 miles on it, sold it. I've always kind of regretted that ever since. So the next step was to look for the donor for the 715, and I was looking for something pretty much like the truck that I had, but preferably one that wasn't going to be, I wasn't going to be sick about cutting up a first-gen Dodge. What I found in North Carolina was an old farm truck, 1-ton, red, 92 Dodge, that had been worked hard, put away wet, put away dirty. It had rust issues, it had a cracked frame, it was rough. But the engine would start, run, ran strong, didn't have a lot of blow-by. So I flew out to North Carolina, looked at the truck, bought it, and arranged to have it shipped to Denver. We'll have to see if we can find the footage for this, but we actually had a situation where we drove it off the transport trailer, tried to drive it around the yard here, and literally had one of the front tires fall off because it was held on by 3 lug nuts. This is a truck we in the end didn't feel too bad about taking apart. But that's my donor for the powertrain. Now some people with these will do things like replace the frame, put the body on a different frame. We've seen the variations on that. I'm choosing, partially because my donor's frame was trash, I'm choosing to keep the M715 frame and put the new powertrain into it. Now, this is a project that gets attention when everything else around here, including the TJ over here, doesn't have work that it needs to do. But it's looking like this winter is going to be the time we finally get to spend some time really working on putting the 715 together and turning it into something else. I have to give credit where credit is due. Things like Ian Johnson's Lockjaw is a huge inspiration. What I have in mind is not to replicate Lockjaw. Not even a little, really. I'm not trying to build a rock crawler out of this. I'm not trying to build a hot rod. This is a case of I actually want to retain the sort of look, feel, and spirit of the original military truck. So I want to keep the bed intact, I want to keep the length. I want to keep the canvas cab, even though that is probably the most awful thing for a vehicle in Colorado with winter and cold and wet. I will probably look to restore the troop canvas. And so this will be a vehicle that I want it to look like and function in most respects like the original military vehicle, with a much better powertrain than the original Jeep Tornado 230. So this is the project as it looks today. And I know you've seen this probably in the background shots of various other things we've done, but this is my M715. The plan for this one is to take the axles from the Ram pickup, including the front axle here, that is out of that 92 Ram. So this is a passenger drop, low pinion, kingpin Dana 60, and the rear axle from a slightly more modern Ram that has the disc brake rear end. This came originally from the factory with a passenger drop Dana 60 front and a Dana 70 rear. So not getting too far from what was original, but the difference between 1968 and 1992 brings us a lot more aftermarket support, a lot more serviceability, and availability of parts. Now, the project is not a restoration. I want to stay true to what the vehicle was intended to be and what it was, but I'm looking to have a more usable, more reliable, frankly more enjoyable vehicle than a full restoration would be. So things like we're putting in a Vanco Hydro Boost system on this rather than the original single piston manual master cylinder. This has been modified for high flow because given the size of tires that this will run, we're going to do a hydraulic assist. Bringing to that point, we are also going to replace the factory manual steering box with a newer, more modern power steering system from a Jeep truck, Jeep vehicle. It's actually a near bolt-in conversion, but we get power steering, power brakes, again the diesel engine, more modern diesel engine, more modern axles. On the other hand, other parts of the truck, like the canvas cab, the vertical windshield, are going to stay here. A lot of people put a civilian cab on these because it makes for a more comfortable vehicle. I want to keep the look and the appearance of the original military truck. So speaking of those big tires, the original truck had a 916 NDT tire on it, which measured out at about 36 inches tall. What we will actually do, this is a more modern military tire coming off of the deuce and a half. We're looking at a 365, 85, R20 here, and it'll either be this size or the 395, which is a little bit bigger. These tend to measure out between about 42 and 46 inches in height. And this is what we're looking to put on the truck when it's all said and done. So again, looking at the status of the truck, we come to the interior. We've got the original seats that have been cleaned up and what's left of them. Probably not going to use these in the end. We still have the original battery box and the tunnel cover. This is going to try to stay as close to original as we can, but at the same time looking to move to something that is probably slightly more comfortable and more usable. We've got a project here that has already been started a little bit, looking to put in a slightly more modern steering column. If nothing else, something that'll give us turn signals that are integrated, which these military trucks never had. So I've been acquiring various kinds of other parts along the way, including the original supports for the troop benches. So as part of the projects we'll be looking to do on this one, we'll actually be rebuilding as best we can a version of the original troop bench and the canvas cab cargo cover assembly for the military truck. Lots of other pieces that we've been acquiring along the way to put this project, make this project real and help us put it together. Over time, both from disassembly of this truck as well as acquisition and planning for this project, we've acquired a few additional parts. There was actually a complete J10 that was purchased at one point with the idea of salvaging some of the pieces from it to be brought into this, and those have been collected over time. If you're familiar with the 715 frame at all, this will look a little bit different because some of the work has been done. One of the things that has happened to this is that the original post-mount outboarded leaf springs have been removed. And they're no longer present. They've been cleaned off the frame for the brackets at the front and the rear. And we have a new set of 53-inch Chevy springs under the front end that have been grafted in. So we have a new spring hanger here that's been brought onto the frame. that is quite a bit forward of where the original springs were at, that happens to align very nicely with this cross member in the frame. In the rear, the spring has also been moved backwards. It's now located the bracket underneath the body mount here and Frenched into the frame slightly. That accommodates the longer rear spring, but keeps the center line of the axle approximately where it was under the original truck. Planning for the diesel engine to be put in it, we've actually brought the cross member from the Ram pickup over. And that was the cross member that carried the diesel engine originally and has the engine mounts. This was all of about 1/8 of an inch narrower than the inside of this boxed M715 frame, which made it very easy to put it in place and then put in a sleeve through the frame for each of the original rivets in this cross member. That allows us to utilize factory motor mounts and locate the engine. We had actually had the engine in the vehicle. The front axle has obviously been located and is largely installed. Our next step with the front end is to rebuild this front axle, re-gear it appropriately, and then we're ready to start installing powertrain. So, as part of leveraging the Ram axle, while the original M715 was a spring under, this is a spring over configuration. And since we were relocating springs on the spring bracketry on the frame, we chose not to relocate the spring bracketry on the axle. Also, given that that perch is cast into the differential, it's much easier to not relocate those brackets. So, while the front end suspension work is largely done, we have not touched the back end yet. It is sitting actually on jack stands all around, so the height and the position is function of the jack stands. You can see the original post mount rear springs. These will be eventually removed and we'll move to a little bit more modern spring configuration here. Also looking to run the 53-inch Chevy leads in the back end. So talking about those original 916 NDT tires, this is the original military tire to this truck, and the original military split rim, and interestingly enough, the hub assembly. This 6-lug pattern that this uses is, near as we can tell, unique to this vehicle, or certainly to only a very small handful. One of the reasons for swapping to a different set of axles is to allow us just a lot more flexibility in terms of the tires, the wheels, the rim packaging. Moving to the civilian axles will give us a lot more aftermarket support, including the ability to find a 8-lug rim that will bolt up in a much more traditional thing. Now, you look at the amount of space between the tire and this wheel arch. This is why we'll move to those much bigger tires. It's something that will do a better job of filling the arch visually and look a little bit less like the vehicle got a 6-inch lift kit and retained its factory stock tires. So I mentioned that the truck was more or less rust-free when I bought it, and honestly it is. We are starting to see some flash rust through the primer where the previous owner had stripped it and primed it. We're also starting to see, some of this sort of multicolor situation here. A few different options of what I could do with this truck. I could just leave it and, the now 40-plus-year-old finish and call it a survivor. I think the reality is we're probably going to refinish it, but I'm going to stick to the military colors, the military paint scheme, and we'll also get the bed cleaned up. I'm thinking a marine forest green, which would be a little bit darker green than it is currently, but I think this truck will look really good and true to its military heritage. So One of the questions that's out there, and kind of still outstanding, is whether we want to do paint or whether we want to look at like a spray-on bedliner type coating. The bedliners have the merit of actually being a very, very tough coating. Downside is they're very hard to repair when they are damaged. So we'll see what the time gets there and what we're looking at. There's part of me that thinks, you know, military, they would like the durability of that heavier coat. On the other hand, you know, if the panels are mostly straight and not looking too bad, we may choose to paint. Okay. Yeah, this is the diesel. This is for a different project. May have seen this in the background of other shots. This is a diesel engine, 2.8 liter turbo diesel out of a 06.
It's called the Liberty.
Thank you, Liberty, out of a 2006 Liberty. This is what's going to be going into the M715. This is a Cummins 6 BTA, 12 valve, 5.9 liter motor. It's not a real high output engine, at least not by today's standards, but this should be a very, very solid engine to push the 715 around, even with the larger tires, after we address the re-gearing from the military equipment. So next steps for the 715, we need to finish building the axles, the front axle, the rear axle, putting the rear axle underneath the truck, and then we need to get this engine prepped for final install. At this point, what we're planning to do is just a reseal of this. So it'll be new valve cover gaskets, new gaskets here on the side train, new pan gaskets, new gaskets on the front of the engine. It ran good when it was pulled, so we expect to be able to put it into the truck without too much more modification. Ideally, get that rear axle in, get the engine in, transmission's already been rebuilt. We've got an upcoming project around the transfer case because we'll need to rebuild the 205 transfer case and install the overdrive or underdrive secondary planetary on it. We should be ready to get it up and moving.